Okay, I guess that's one way to get a crowd excited. There is a baby boy. My wife is actually in week 39 as we speak, so yes, I will not hesitate to run home if that is necessary. On the other hand, probability says nothing's going to happen. So, anyway, hi, it's very nice to be here, especially in week 39. Because really gives you a new perspective on all the things that we're talking about. And a lot of my friends and colleagues, heard that I was going to have a baby, and everyone told me pretty much the same thing. They're like, "This is not a time for A/B testing." Okay, no, do not try the analysis part. That's not what fatherhood is about. So it's nice to be able to talk about this and that in two separate worlds. So thank you for indulging me, and thank you to IBM for hosting this. I feel like this is such an exciting time for entrepreneurs, because I don't really have to tell you because you're here. But we're living through what I call the democratization of entrepreneurship. And for those of you who remember your Karl Marx, remember there was a time when power came from the ownership of the means of production? That phrase, it was too bright for me to see if anyone can tell. But we're now living through a time when you can rent the means of production, which is really different. So from cloud computing to 3D printing, advanced manufacturing, all these different trends are making it possible for people really armed with very little more than a credit card to compete as first-class global citizens against the world's largest companies. And that has prompted a bunch of really interesting things, one of which is this collaborations that we're seeing between startups and large companies, and even the development of entrepreneurs inside of big companies themselves. So it's kind of mixing up everything, and what I find really interesting getting to travel and meet people who don't necessarily fit the pattern or mold or the image you have of what an entrepreneur is supposed to be if you only watch the movies. So part of the message that Lean Startup as a community, as a movement, what we want people to understand is that entrepreneurship is not like it looks like in the movie. Who's seen the Social Network? That people have pretty much seen it. Who's seen my favorite entrepreneurship movie of all time, Ghostbusters? People think Ghostbusters is a movie about the paranormal, but it's not really. It's actually about a group of guys who get thrown out of the university and have to start a startup. You remember they mortgage the house and they take, I think, Venkman's loan, take all of his money basically to get the movie. You remember how it goes? And in the movies, including in Ghostbusters, it always proceeds like this. Act 1, the plucky protagonists and how they came up with their awesome idea and how they just so happen to be in the right place at the right time. Think how good the Ghostbusters timing is. It was like right after they basically run out of money from their first round of funding. Like Zool invades Manhattan like that day. It's incredible timing. And I think I meet so many entrepreneurs and I'm like, oh yeah, they're waiting for Zool. They're sure hoping that their customers will show up. Anyway, so that's Act 1, very exciting. Act 2, it's action-packed but short. We call it the photo montage. And it's just, no dialogue or anything, just bust some ghosts, shake some hands, with a social network, they're like pounding on keyboards and writing on those cool window-based whiteboards. Anyway, you get past Act 2, so you can get right on to Act 3, which is, really, really exciting stuff happens where you make a lot of money, you have to cover magazines, you get to sue each other, you get to save up Marshmallow Man, etc. And listen, the movie is primarily about Act 1 and Act 3, because that's what's exciting and fun, things happen. But those of you who've been around startups know that the vast majority of decisions that get made that actually influence the outcome of the startup are made when? During the photo montage. Why aren't those in the movie? It's because they're too boring. Right? Think about that. I want you to imagine a movie in which you break in the action for a product prioritization meeting. Okay, we have a meeting to decide which customers do we want to listen to and who do we want to ignore. Or you want to watch two co-founders fight about whether we should go with our vision or we should test it with the data, for 7 hours. If I could have all of those hours of my life back, believe me, I wish I could. It's incredibly boring stuff, which is my segue to this next slide. Because I wanted to bring you a couple of ideas from the Lean Startup for those that are new to the concept. And, whenever I show this slide, especially in entrepreneurial communities, people start to get confused, because this is supposed to be like the cool, cutting-edge thing about entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship is like the thing they saw in the movies, and it's fun, and it's exciting, and I'm here to talk to you about stuff that is hard and boring, like management and accounting. Now, I know people aren't like, ooh, accounting, how exciting. I know, but it's really incredibly boring, so I'm sorry, just how it is. But actual entrepreneurs, so that those of you who are contestants who are actually in the trenches, in the arena right now trying to make this happen, entrepreneurship is nothing like it is in the movies. It's incredibly and when you get something right, you don't get a gold star and get promoted. You just get to stay alive for the next problem. That's it. That's your big reward day in and day out. You know what I'm talking about? Anyone here? Yeah. It's not. We've got a few people who live through this. It's not personal. It's not you. I know that when you read TechCrunch, it seems like with other startups, everything's going smoothly and it's clear, but it's not. Trust me, I've now gotten to look under the hood of a lot of startups. They all look exactly the same, and it's Muppet Labs, all the way down. But I do think that just because startups are chaotic and difficult, and most of them fail, it doesn't mean that there's nothing we can do about it. And that means that it's basically, it's not just gambling, it's not just rolling the dice. There are things that we can do during the boring parts of entrepreneurship that will never make it into the official Harvard case study, which also, by the way, is that 3-act part with the boring stuff cut out. It's never going to make it into the movie, and yet it is actually what matters, and that's what Lean Startup is all about. So I want to try to convince you that even though you think of innovation as cool and actually can and in fact must be managed. So bear with me. All right. First is something that this room is still living. Entrepreneurs are everywhere. It's not just like it is in the movies. A couple years ago, gosh, it's coming up 5 years ago, I think. I first started talking about Lean Startup, and I put this definition up on a slide just like this. And I said, if we're going to make entrepreneurs more rigorous, we probably should agree on what a startup is. Because just because you saw it in a movie once that's not good enough to build the science of entrepreneurship. So here's my definition. A human institution designed to create. And I noted at the time, this has nothing to do with size of industry. I thought that was like an interesting consequence of this definition. It doesn't say only if you're in a garage and you eat ramen noodles. It doesn't matter what kind of noodles you eat. But what makes you a startup is that you don't yet know what's going to work. So entrepreneurs have more in common with scientists or soldiers than with our traditional image of an MBA manager or business person. And so when I said that at first, to be honest, I did not know if that was true. It was just a deductive consequence of the theory. I worked my whole career as an engineer in Silicon Valley style startups. Quite a few had blown up in my face, but I had had some success. But it seemed to me logical. I think the very first time I gave that talk, people have been coming up to me after the presentation, just like groups like this, and they would say to me, Eric, thanks for that talk, I loved it, I accept your challenge. And I'd be like, what challenge? They're like, well, you said entrepreneur can apply even in my ridiculous circumstance. Of course, I added the ridiculous in my memory. Because, it started out people who were not in Silicon Valley, someone from New York would come up and say, I can do it in New York. And I'd be like, okay, sure, yes. And then someone will come up and say, we can do it in an enterprise software company. And I was like, all right, this seems kind of right. And then some people were like, we can do it in finance. Like, yes. And then someone came up to me and they said, I work in a 10,000 person company. And I believe we can apply these ideas there, just like you said in the slide. And I was like, listen, I don't think that, I don't know. Why are you talking to me about that? What do I know? And they're like, well, I want your advice on what to do. And I said, okay, fine. The internet is this big force for disruption. And they're like, yeah, I know. It's like, okay, I think you should really try new products and not just your existing products. They're like, yeah, I got that. You should read this great book called The Innovators. They're like, listen, I know all that. Okay, I got that. I'm a general manager inside of a big company, but I have this problem. I got all the politics covered. I got my team going. We're all set. We got our separate P&L. We got permission from. We got all the stuff. I moved off the checklist. But now my team shows up every day for work, and they want to know what are they supposed to do. Like, what actually do you do if you're in a startup? Because the traditional tools that we've been taught to use. And so from that time, what I've started, and that conversation, by the way, is exactly the same conversation I used to have with my co-founders, right? The fancy VC who's investing in our company, who's got an MBA from you-know-where, thinks we should do things this traditional way, and wants to know where's our ROI prioritization matrix. And we're trying to keep the room from exploding. We're trying to keep things from not catching too much on fire. We don't really have time for ROI prioritization matrix. Why is it that when we take those traditional techniques into the domain of time certainty, they don't work very well? Well, I think it's because everything I just said is the world's most long-winded way of saying that a startup is an experiment. That's it. That's what it means to operate in uncertainty. It means that when you're doing a startup, you are conducting an experiment. You are a scientist, whether you admit it or you pretend to be an astrologer/MBA. An experiment. So the only question is, can we run that? Do you want to run that? Or do you want to just roll the dice? But there's something unusual about the kinds of experiments we're running today, and I feel like it's really evident in this crowd. The experiments of the 20th century, that 20th century management were really all about solving were questions of, can something be built? That the world needed more stuff, and we needed to figure out how can we produce it at scale. But the questions that we face are really different because we have more productive capacity in our economy than we really know what to do with. So the question of our time is not, can it be built, but should it be built? Is there actually a customer who wants to buy, use, adopt, retain, share this thing that I think is so great? And of course, it's always so great in my mind's eye because I'm picturing what Act 3 of the movie is going to look like. But that's not how it usually actually works out, as some of you know. Well, not for your startup, but maybe the people sitting next to you. Anyway, so I want to convince you that entrepreneurship is the management discipline that deals specifically with situations of high uncertainty. And that's why we have so much failure in the innovation economy. And I guess, now that I think about it, I should probably make a disclaimer. And I appreciate this wasn't my official introduction bio, thank you. As I've gotten more prominent and the startup has gotten more famous, I've been suffering from introduction inflation, which I appreciate. But people now leave out the fact that the vast, overwhelming majority of products I have ever worked on in my life, even today, have nobody using them. Okay, they're catastrophic failures. I was there with the engineers, so I've worked on making sure they had a really scalable architecture. Proud to report, no scalability problems in any of those products, but not okay. So it's, don't be that person. If those of you who are in startups right now, do not be the person joking about how you didn't have a scalability problem because nobody wanted your product. It's painful. But it has to be somebody's fault, naturally. And naturally not my fault. That would be inappropriate because I'm the one on stage. So I like to blame this guy. Some of you remember Frederick Winslow Taylor. He's been conveniently dead for just about 100 years. So he never argues with me. Thank you, Fred, for doing that. I hope you'll bear with me just for a moment. I know history of management's not what you thought you're signing up for to come here and talk about entrepreneurship. But it's really important to understand that the systems of management that we take for granted today, that to us just seem obvious, like duh, actually had to be invented by people. Like, try this one on size. The idea that work should be done as efficiently as possible. Like, I want you to imagine having to write a polemic in favor of that idea and ask yourself, who am I trying to convince? Like, apart from some corrupt government officials in a few places in the world, where are people who don't actually already believe in their bones that work should be done as efficiently as possible? My favorite part of what was called at that time scientific management is what Taylor called the task plus bonus system. Let me describe this to you and see if you can wrap your mind around it just for a moment. Imagine that you had a large project. You were to propose this system. The best way to get a large project done would be to decompose it into a series of smaller sub-projects called tasks. Get with me so far? Okay, and then farm those tasks out to functional specialists who each sit in their individual departmental silo, overseen by a functional foreman, who do the same kind of task over and over and over again, right? And then, here's the kicker. This is very controversial in 1911. If someone finds a way to do their task better than anticipated, beats the forecast better than expected, they should be paid a bonus rather than being penalized. Who's with me? If you read the Principles of Scientific Management, it's like a 100-page essay trying to convince people that this is not insane. And it's hard for us to appreciate because we take it completely for granted. What do you mean? Of course, the way to get work done is you have a manager decompose it into functional silos. We just assume. But deeply embedded in that way of working is a concept that is causing increasing problems for startups. And that is that it is all based on the most important tool in the management toolkit in the 20th century, which is planning and forecasting. The whole system is based on, did you do better than the forecast? Did you do better than anticipated? And we all know this in our bones, right? A manager who's on time, ahead of plan, ahead of budget, is going to be VC, and you promise them a hockey stick that looks a certain shape, and it doesn't come out that exact same shape. Good luck raising your next round of finance. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, so we spent a lot of time on what I call success theater, which is trying to massage the. But that doesn't work as well for entrepreneurs as it does for traditional managers because we didn't know how to make a good promise in the first place. Because where did accurate forecasts come from? They come, and this is my opinion, but I believe that accurate forecasts come when you can extrapolate from a long and stable operating history. And who feels like the world's getting more and more stable every day? Right? Everything's getting easier to forecast, and our business is just the same as it was. But that is the opportunity that we're trying to seize as entrepreneurs. And yet, as soon as we have even the tiniest amount of success, we will be asked over and over again to start making predictions and forecasts of what's going to happen next. And it's going to be assumed that if we miss those forecasts, if we miss those projections, then we have somehow acted incompetently. Because that's like that's like management 101. He who misses his forecast is fired. Yeah? So you wonder why are managers. Because if you admit that you learned something, it means that you didn't make a good plan or you failed to execute the plan. So it's like you should be fired or double fired. Anyway, so I want to convince you that there's a new management toolkit that is needed. It is what we call entrepreneurial management. It's a management system specifically designed for that soil of high uncertainty in which startups grow. And it's a new management toolkit. There are new tools. The most famous or infamous, I guess depending on your point of view, tool in that new toolkit is what we call the pivot. Anyone sick and tired of hearing about pivots already? That is my fault, so I do apologize. This used to be like a Silicon Valley thing, but it has fully escaped into the zeitgeist of our society, which I find very disturbing. This cartoon, I'm not making this up, okay? This cartoon is from the New Yorker magazine, not from some obscure startup tech blog, okay? It says, "I'm not leaving you, I'm pivoting to another man." So sorry about that. Anyway, unlike in the movies, okay, contra the movies, contra the Harvard business case studies, and I don't mean to pick on anybody in particular, but you know what I'm talking about. Contra the magazine profiles, actual entrepreneurs have almost no idea what they're doing when they start. And so the successful entrepreneurs are not the people that have better ideas than the failed entrepreneurs. If you look at the record, you get the real story behind the scenes, behind the curtain of what really happened. The founders of famous companies had the kernel of a good idea. They were onto something, but they also harbored an equal number of totally ridiculous ideas that would have killed the company. Great entrepreneurs have this ability that when they get into difficulty, when the strategy is not, which is a change in strategy without a change in vision. This is something that those of us who had a traditional job and a traditional business have a really hard time with, right? If you miss a forecast, what happens? You get a second chance to go try something different? No, you're fired. Right? That's not the right way for startups, because we have to admit, and this is hard, we have to admit that when we miss the forecast, it's quite often not because we were incompetent, but because we were stupid. That's different. Right? Incompetent means, you tried to do something and failed, you were sloppy, and there are entrepreneurs who are sloppy, but stupid means there were facts that you didn't have that you needed to have. You didn't know something that you needed to know. You have a problem of ignorance, not incompetence. So the pivot is a way to admit that not only is probably going to happen, it absolutely 100%, I guarantee you, will happen in the life of your company. Well, no, you're not your company, but everybody else who's sitting next to you. Their company is going to have to pivot. Okay? That's just what it means to operate under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So, first of all, if that's going to happen all the time, if that's an inevitable part of being in a startup, let's plan for it and admit it and get our investors and our boss or CFO, whoever else, let's get everybody to understand that we can start to do some pretty cool stuff like this. See, I believe that the only source of competitive advantage left in today's world is whoever learns fastest wins. It's that simple. Right? That's not too controversial. But here's what it means for startups in particular. You talk about runway all the time, right? How many months before I run out of money and then my company is dead? And a lot of people, their startup advice comes down to don't die. Which is good advice. I definitely recommend it. Do not die if you can avoid it. But when you need to go down to the next level of detail, besides don't die, you want to think about how do I maximize my runway. Now, people sometimes think the way to do that is to cut costs, to cut burn, to have cheaper office chairs or cheaper pizza or whatever. But that's not what the lean and lean startup stands for. What we believe is that we can use resources more effectively, because the true measure of runway in a startup is how many opportunities to pivot do you have left. It's like how many swings of the bat do you have left? How many down? Pick your favorite sports metaphor. It's how many of those do you have left before the game is over? And if we can find a way to shrink the time between pivots, we've magically extended runway without actually having to raise an extra dollar. Does that make sense? So all of the techniques of lean startup, the lean comes from lean manufacturing, which some of you will have studied. There are techniques for improving that cycle time, reducing batch size, focusing on the trade-offs between speed, quality, and time. They're just designed to help us run the experiment, get the learning we need a little bit sooner than we otherwise would have. Does that make sense? Okay. So that brings us to validated or scientific learning, which is the unit of progress for entrepreneurs. Now, I mentioned all the startups I've been in crash and burn. I noticed a pattern in a lot of these startups, which is that we always wrote a really beautiful business plan. I mean, elegant and well written, if I just say so myself. You would probably weep if you read it. That's how good it was. And the business plan always predicted in Appendix B. See, this sounds familiar, right? We went Appendix B with a big spreadsheet. Spreadsheet produces a graph of future revenue of the company, always a beautiful hockey stick shape. I mean, you wouldn't believe, you know, flat, boom, to the room. And what we would notice, you launch the product after much development and fanfare, and the first couple months, you'd be like, we are right on track. This is outstanding. The business plan is amazing. It says we would have almost no customers and almost no revenue month in, month out. We're right on time, on budget, on schedule. Like, this is going to be great. Hockey stick to commence in 3, 2. Right? Any of you ever listened to that? Yeah. I can't really see you. You don't have to raise your hand. It's okay. But maybe give me that nod. Okay, if you can. Yeah. So okay. The question is, how do you know if you're on the flat part of the hockey stick or just the flat part of the flat part? That's what we want to know. So we call that phenomenon achieving failure. It's not that we didn't do what it said in the business plan. It's not that we weren't on budget or on time. It wasn't that our product had high quality. It's that we were driving a car off a cliff and bragging about how efficiently we were doing it. Right, so we're building the wrong thing very efficiently. And that's the wrong question for us to be asking. What we really need to be thinking about is go all the way back to starting as an experiment. If we're trying to learn something, like complicated in the world. Like some, our multi-stakeholder analysis, but like a lot of products where fundamental in the experiment is simply this. Like, will customers buy this product for $99.99? That's it. So, what's the best, most efficient way to run that experiment? Well, one way would be to spend 5 years and $40 million, as I did once in my life, building the most elaborate, complicated, maximum version of that product you can imagine, and ship it with great fanfare and to talk about it on CNN and the works, and then find out that nobody wants to buy it. Or you could create a one-page landing page, single web page with a giant buy now button. And on the second page, you apologize if the product is not yet available, but that you'll keep the person's information in line for pre-order. Note that both of these experiments produce the exact same learning. No one will even get to page 2, to the apology. Because what did I say before? Nobody wants to buy this mythical product. So if nobody wants to buy it, wouldn't you rather find that out after 1 day and $1 rather than millions of dollars? Now, I understand your product couldn't possibly be encapsulated by such a simple experiment. Okay, fair enough. The question we need to train ourselves to ask is, whatever we're trying to learn, what's the fastest way to get that learning? We call that the minimum viable product, or MVP. It doesn't necessarily have to be a landing page. It can be quite complicated. I have, in the last couple of years, had the chance to work with super, mega industrial and heavy equipment manufacturers, cancer, all kinds of really crazy stuff. And in some of those businesses, the normal cycle time of the business is like you come with a new product every 5 years. So if we can drive that cycle time down, minimum viable product, and produce a product in 1 year instead of 5 years, it's revolutionary. So again, remember, what matters is who learns the fastest wins. So it doesn't matter how fast you are compared to some random guy in Silicon Valley who made a landing page. What matters is how fast can you learn as compared to your competitors. And if you're on the winning side of that competitive situation, those of you who studied maneuver warfare and the OODA loop, any former Marines in the audience will know what I'm talking about. Like, if you can be understanding what customers want and what the market conditions are faster than your competitors, you're almost guaranteed to win. And if the reverse is true, I don't know how well financed you are, how much of a head start you got by being in stealth mode or whatever, you're toast. Fair? Okay. So, I believe the way we're currently organized for entrepreneurship, we are wasting people's time on an industrial scale. Because we are building products that people don't want and pretending like it's the same kind of difficulty as if we tried to invent quantum teleportation and it was too hard. But figuring out what people want is it's not a dark art, it's not difficult, it's not impossible, it just requires the same level of scientific rigor we're used to bringing to the technical parts of our business. So that brings me to build, measure, learn. So, if those of you who studied manufacturing know that such a thing is the fundamental cycle time, and remember this, how much time elapses between when we get an order from a customer and we deliver to them a high quality product at a good price on time, and want to drive that time down. Entrepreneurship has a similar build, measure, learn loop. It's just, we may not know who the customer is yet. So how do we know how to get an order from them? In fact, a lot of startups fail before they ever get the first order because that is in fact the crux of the problem. So we call this build, measure, learn. It's simply a way of saying, if you believe what I was saying before, we want to figure out what do I want to learn and work backwards to how do I get that learning as quickly as possible. This says let's get on a cadence, a rhythm of as quickly as possible, taking our ideas and validating if they're any good or not. I think whoever can do that fastest in any market is going to win. Now most of us, unfortunately, have been trained in some kind of functional discipline, like engineering or marketing or accounting or whatever they teach MBAs. Just kidding, management. And the problem with all of those disciplines, including my own engineering, is we are training people to do their little sub-part the best. So like when I was an engineer, I used to say this all the time. People come into me and they say, oh, I need you to add some extra reports to the data warehousing part of your app so we can get more data. And I'd be like, listen, that is a waste of time. Because if I waste my time building those reports for you, then I won't be able to build the software that our customers want as quickly. You see the fallacy baked right in? Right, so like if I close my eyes and floor the accelerator, the car will go faster. Which is true, but maybe not necessarily getting to our destination any faster. We're committing that fallacy across every function because we're used to being in those Fred Taylor style individual silos focusing on how to do our job as good as possible. Instead, we have to think as entrepreneurs, how do I organize the entire company to get through this feedback loop as quickly as possible so that we have a continuous process of learning. We call that creating sustainable growth through continuous innovation. It's not enough just to come out with one product that customers like. As soon as you have any kind of success in this world, you're instantly going to be copied by 20 people. So it's not just about learning one thing at one time that got you that one insight, but creating a rhythm where the whole company can be built to learn new things over time. And there's a lot to it. So this is like a little sneak preview. Obviously, when you go online, there are these circles in every part of the globe now. You can obviously read my book and many others. All of these techniques, what they have in common is, although they operate at some specific stage of the feedback loop, they have the net effect of minimizing total time. That's what minimum viable product, continuous deployment, A/B testing are really all about. But I know that some of you were like, wait a minute. The guy promised he was going to talk about accounting before it was done. I know. I'm very eager to talk about accounting too. I know everybody is. It's so exciting, isn't it? Listen, if you told me 5 years ago that one day I would be an advocate for accounting reform, I probably would have killed myself. So, I'm sorry to have to bring this up. But it is absolutely essential. I have come to the conclusion that we cannot be more successful as entrepreneurs unless we get clear about how we want to be held accountable. So what happens is when we're raising money, it doesn't matter if it's from a VC or a CFO or any of you are in a garage type of entrepreneur where you're trying to convince your spouse to let you spend your life saving. Right? You always, at some point, entrepreneurs have this really nasty habit of spending other people's money. That's what we do. And then those people come knocking and want to know, what did you do with my money? And unless we change how we get held accountable, we'll always have the same dynamic. We create what we call a plausible promise. Like, what is the most ludicrous amount of results I can promise? It's not so ludicrous that the person will think I'm crazy. Right? So it's like, I can promise you, I don't know, $100 million in 5 years. It's pretty good. If I promise you $500 billion in 5 years, you're crazy. And if I only promise you $500 in 5 years, you wouldn't be interested, right? So we're trying to find that, like, what is the most ridiculous business plan we can get away with proposing? You know what I'm talking about? Okay. And listen, our corporate colleagues do this all the time too. They go to the CFO and say, hey, I got this great business plan. We can spend the company's money on this new initiative, and here's this crazy thing. And then we get upset when 5 seconds later, those same finance people who just wrote us the check are like, excellent, thank you for giving me a prediction of what's going to happen practically every day for the next 5 years. I'll just sit back and wait for this to happen. So we fast forward a year later. You know how this is going to go, right? CFO, honey, my spouse, VC. Remember when I promised you these incredible results that are in that chart that you found? Yeah. Not so much. We, instead of having millions of dollars in revenue, have ones of dollars of revenue. Okay. I've actually done this. It's not very pleasant. The graph is not in thousands, it is in ones, in singles. And you see where this is going? But we have learned so much. You should totally give us another year and another $5 million and another chunk of our life saving. You're going to get fired. That's what happens. Because our assumption, our built-in assumption in our current accounting system is that if we didn't hit the forecast, you're incompetent. So what we need to do is develop a new accounting system that can create accountability to what I call leading indicators rather than trailing indicators. So instead of looking at the vanity metrics of how many millions of customers and billions of dollars of revenue, what can we look at on a per customer basis? Think of it like the inputs to that spreadsheet that drives that hockey stick growth. How can we look at the cost to acquire a customer, the revenue per customer, the repeat purchase rate, the net promoter score, things that can be measured on a small base, so that we can figure out that minimum viable product as we do one product after another, one experiment after another. Is it getting us closer to that, nirvana that we promised in the business plan? So these are the learning milestones that I think can replace our current business milestones that are all about being on time and on budget. I'm not going to get into this in any detail because it involves math, and it doesn't really start. People love Pivot and MVP and whatnot. You can buy t-shirts that say that stuff on it. No teachers I'm aware of say innovation accounting on yet, because it involves math, I understand. But if you're serious about this, if you want to make a career out of entrepreneurship, I urge you to learn this math and master it. Because if you can give people progress reports that are denominated in validated learning instead of BS, you will be much more likely to be successful because you'll have the opportunity to pivot with your stakeholders rather than just hoping for the best. Does that make sense? Some people with me? Everywhere, entrepreneurship is management. The unit of progress of entrepreneurship is validated or scientific learning. We can organize our company to be built to learn using the build, better, learn, feedback loop, and last we need accounting reform along the lines of innovation accounting. Now, it is my job as a traveling expert or whatnot to leave many questions unanswered. Like, okay, but how specific, hey, mister, how specifically do you know when it's time to pivot? Yeah, good question. What is the difference in vision? You said it's a change in strategy without a change in vision, but what is the difference in vision and strategy? Yeah, we should talk about that. Oh, and also, my favorite, the last question, which I think is the most important question for all of us to be thinking about. As we grow, as we scale, which is, after all, our ambition, universal ambition, how can we organize a company to go faster rather than going slower? And can we build, what I call a modern company, a company that is organized for that sustainable growth through continuous innovation, so that we're not just building the next generation of big dumb companies that we're trying to replace right now. I always talk to entrepreneurs who are like, oh, I hate big companies, that's why I want to work for myself. Listen, if you hate big companies so much, why are you trying to create a new one? It doesn't make sense. So let's give some thought now when we still have that opportunity to what is that company that we want to create? What do we actually want to stand for? What are the values we want to operate under? And what is the speed and intensity we want to have? Now, I think that it is possible to do what I just described, but to learn more about that, you'll have to, read this great book which came out. No, just kidding. I'm happy to stick around and take some questions afterwards. I know I think we're set now to do the award. Okay, so it has been a real pleasure.